Casket was already lowered when I realized she still wasn't there. I stood at the edge of that hole in the ground at Rosewood Memorial in Asheville, holding a single white lily my son's mother had loved, and I kept turning my head toward the parking lot like an old fool waiting for a bus that had already left town. The pastor was talking. People were crying. My boys' co-workers from the architecture firm had flown in from Charlotte and Raleigh, and one all the way from Boston, and they kept glancing at me with that pity in their eyes, the kind that says, "We know, we see, we're sorry your daughter-in-law isn't here." Her name was Camilla Whitford Drennan, after she married my son 2.5 years ago. She had hyphenated it because, in her words, Drennan sounds like a plumbing company on its own. I'd laughed when she said that. I had liked her then. I had wanted to like her then. I had wanted to like her anyway. My boy loved her, and that was enough for me back when I still trusted my own judgment. My son's name was Beauregard. We called him Beau his whole life. He was 34 years old when the hospital called me on a Tuesday morning to say he'd had a massive cardiac event in his office and that the paramedics had worked on him for 41 minutes before they stopped. 41 minutes. I remember that number because the doctor said it twice, like he wanted me to know they had tried, like he needed me to absolve him of something. I'm 67 years old. I retired from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department 4 years ago, after 38 years on the job, the last 12 as a detective in major crimes. I've buried a wife. I've buried both my parents. I've buried 2 partners and a younger brother who drank himself to death in a trailer outside Hendersonville. I thought I knew what grief was. I thought I had a callus on that part of my soul. Burying your child is not grief. Grief is what you feel when an old person dies after a long life. What I felt standing at that grave was something else. Something with teeth. It chewed on me from the inside out. And his wife wasn't there. She'd called me the night before, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Said she couldn't do it. Said walking into that funeral home and seeing him in the casket would break her, would shatter her. That she just needed one more day to find her strength. I'd told her I understood. I told her to take whatever time she needed and just please come to the graveside service the next morning at 11. She'd promised. She'd whispered it like a vow. "I'll be there, Dad. I promise." She wasn't there at 11. She wasn't there at 11:30. The pastor finally looked at me and asked, gentle as he could, if we should wait a little longer. I shook my head. I said, "Let's start." I said my son wouldn't want to be left out in the heat any longer than he had to be. I drove home alone in my Silverado, with my tie loose around my neck and a casserole dish my neighbor had pushed into my hands, sitting on the passenger seat, smelling like onions and grief. My phone had been on silent. When I finally checked it, sitting in my driveway with the engine still running, I saw I had 47 notifications. Most of them were condolences. People I hadn't talked to in years suddenly remembering my number, but 3 of them were from a friend of mine named Stuart, an old colleague from the department who'd retired the same year I did, and who now spent most of his time on Facebook arguing with strangers about football. Stuart had sent me 3 text messages in a row. "Hank, you need to see this. I'm sorry, brother. I'm so sorry. Call me when you can." He'd attached a screenshot. I almost didn't open it. I sat in my truck staring at that little gray bubble for, I don't know how long, my thumb hovering over the screen. Some part of me knew. Some old detective part of me that had walked into too many bedrooms and seen too many things, knew that whatever was in that picture was going to be worse than the day I'd already had, and the day I'd already had been the worst of my life. I opened it. It was a screenshot of an Instagram story, my daughter-in-law's account. The one she'd set to private right after Beau died, the one she'd told me she was deactivating because I just can't stand to see anyone's smiling faces right now, Dad. It hurts too much. Apparently she had not deactivated it. Apparently she had merely not blocked Stuart's daughter-in-law, who had taken the screenshot and passed it to her father-in-law, who had passed it to me. The picture showed Camilla on a beach. White sand. Turquoise water. The kind of water you only see in Caribbean travel commercials. She was wearing a yellow string bikini I had never seen before, and she was holding up a margarita in a fishbowl glass, and she was laughing, head thrown back, mouth open, both rows of teeth showing. There was a man behind her. He had his arm around her waist, and his hand was sitting on her hip like it had been there 1,000 times before. I recognized him. Of course I recognized him. His name was Jorrel. He'd been the landscaper Bo had hired 6 months earlier to redo the back gardens at the house Bo had bought for them in Black Mountain. Bo had liked him. Bo had paid him too much, in my opinion, and recommended him to friends. The caption underneath the photo read, in cheerful pink letters with 3 little palm tree emojis, "Some people only get one life. I'm choosing to actually live mine." It had been posted 43 minutes earlier, while the pastor was reading from 1 Corinthians, while I was throwing dirt on my son's casket. I sat in my truck and I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I have cried plenty in my life, and I am not ashamed of it. But I did not cry in that moment. I felt something else. I felt the way I used to feel when I was working a homicide, and I had walked into a scene and I had seen what some animal had done to another human being, and I had made a quiet promise to myself that I was going to find this person, that I was going to be patient, that I was going to be careful, that I was not going to rest. I felt my old job come back into my hands like a tool I had set down and forgotten I knew how to use, and then my phone buzzed. It was a text, from a number I did not recognize. The country code was strange. I read it twice before my brain made sense of what I was looking at, and even then I refused to believe it. "Dad, don't react. Don't say anything. Don't tell anyone you got this. Drive to the cabin. I'll meet you there. I'm alive. I love you. Please come now." The cabin. We had one cabin. We had one cabin. My grandfather had built it in 1948 on a piece of land off the Blue Ridge Parkway, a 2-room thing with a tin roof and a wood stove and a creek running behind it. My father had rebuilt it in 79. I had rebuilt it again in 79. I had rebuilt it again in 2003. Bo and I had rebuilt the porch together 2 summers before he died. Nobody knew about that cabin except me and Bo. Not Camilla. Not even my late wife had really known how to find it. She had been there twice and gotten lost both times. I sat in my driveway holding that phone, and I felt the world tilt sideways. I'm a rational man. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in signs. I have arrested enough con artists and grifters and outright frauds in my career to know that human beings will lie about absolutely anything if they think there's a payout in it. My first thought was that this was some sick prank. My second thought was that someone was trying to get me out to that cabin so they could hurt me. My third thought, which I tried very hard to push away, was that my boy was alive. I started the truck. I drove. It takes about an hour to get from my house in North Asheville to that cabin if you know the back roads, which I do. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my service weapon, which I still keep in a locked box under the seat, sitting in my lap with a round in the chamber. I pulled off the main road onto the gravel logging trail at 1:15. I parked behind the cabin where my truck couldn't be seen from the road. I got out slow. I had the gun down by my thigh. The cabin door opened. My son walked out onto the porch. He had grown a beard. He had lost weight. He was wearing a flannel shirt I didn't recognize, and his hair was a different color, darker, like he'd dyed it. But it was him. It was Bo. My boy. My only child. The kid I had taught to throw a baseball and to drive a stick shift and to apologize when he was wrong. I dropped the gun in the dirt. I made a sound I have never made before in my life. He came down the porch steps 2 at a time, and we collided in the yard, and I don't remember what we said to each other for the first few minutes. There weren't words. There were just 2 men holding on to each other so hard it hurt and not letting go. When we finally went inside, when I finally sat down in one of the old kitchen chairs, and he handed me a glass of water with hands that were shaking almost as bad as mine, he started to talk. I'm going to tell you what he told me, but I want you to understand something first. I want you to understand that I am a former detective, and as he was talking, Part of my brain was already running the case, already looking for holes, already asking the questions you're going to ask. I'm going to walk you through it. Bo told me he'd been having chest pains for about 6 months. He'd seen a cardiologist, a man named Dr. Pelletier at Mission Hospital. Dr. Pelletier had been an old friend of mine. We'd gone to high school together in Marshall. Dr. Pelletier had run the tests. Bo's heart was fine. His blood pressure was fine. His cholesterol was fine. The chest pains were stress. But they kept happening, and they kept happening at very specific times. They kept happening, Bo told me, when Camilla brought him a glass of wine in the evening, when she made him his protein shake in the morning, when she insisted on cooking his dinner, even though she had never cooked before in their marriage, and now suddenly was very interested in his nutrition. Bo, being his mother's son and not his father's, had not wanted to suspect his wife, but he had started to. Quietly. Privately. He had started pouring out the wine when she wasn't looking. The chest pains stopped. He had started skipping the protein shakes. The chest pains stopped. He had started eating cereal for breakfast, dry out of the box, only when she wasn't there, and the chest pains stopped completely. So my son had gone to Dr. Pelletier and told him what he suspected. And Dr. Pelletier, who had known Bo since Bo was 7 years old, had ordered a different kind of blood test. A toxicology panel. A specific one. It came back hot for ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Small amounts. Sublethal in any individual dose, but cumulative. Building up over months. The kind of thing that, if it kept going, would eventually kill a man and look exactly like heart failure. Bo had not gone to the police. He had not come to me. I want you to understand that I have spent the last several months trying to forgive him for that, and I think I have. He had not come to me because he was 34 years old and he was ashamed, and because he didn't want me to see what his marriage had become, and because he had no proof. He had a blood test. He had a suspicion. Camilla had a story for everything. She would have lawyered up. She would have walked. And she would have come back and tried again in a different way, and the next time she might have gotten away with it. So Bo, my son, had cooked up something else. Dr. Quam Pelletier had agreed to help him. So had a hospice nurse named Marjorie who had been Pelletier's sister-in-law. So had a man at the funeral home named Thurman, whose son Bo had gone to college with. So had a federal agent named Special Agent Kowalski out of the Charlotte field office, because the moment Pelletier had explained the situation, the FBI had become very interested in Camilla, and very interested specifically in what they suspected was a much larger pattern. Camilla had been married before, twice before. I did not know that. Bo had not known that until very recently. Her first husband had died at 31 of an undiagnosed heart condition in Tampa, Florida, in 2014. Her second husband had died at 29 of complications from an unknown viral infection in Sacramento in 2019. Each time, my daughter-in-law, who had been going by different last names, had collected on a life insurance policy. Each time, she had moved across the country and started over. Bo had the file. Pelletier had pulled it together. Kowalski had confirmed it. They had been building a case for 2 months when Bo had collapsed in his office. Except he hadn't collapsed. He had taken a small dose of a medication Pelletier had given him that simulated the symptoms of a major cardiac event for about 90 seconds. The paramedics, who were in on it, had loaded him into the ambulance. The ER, where Pelletier was waiting, had pronounced him. The funeral home, where Thurman was waiting, had received the body. The casket I had stood over had been sealed and weighted. There was no body inside it. There never had been. I want to be very clear with you about this part, because the comments I have read since I started telling this story online have asked me about it more than anything else. There was no other body. There was no John Doe. There was no innocent person used as a stand-in. I would not have allowed that, and neither would my son. What was in that casket was sandbags and an empty wooden interior, weighted to feel like a man. Bo had insisted on a closed casket because, the cover story went, he had hit his head when he fell, and the family wanted to remember him as he was. Camilla had not asked questions about that. Camilla had not asked questions about anything. Camilla had been too busy. Too busy with what, you ask? Too busy texting Jarrell. Too busy moving money. Too busy filing claims on the 2 life insurance policies that totaled $3.4 million, both of which had been opened in the last 14 months without Bo's knowledge. With forged signatures Camilla had practiced for who knows how long. Too busy booking a flight to Punta Cana for the day of the funeral, paid for with a credit card she had opened in Bo's name. Too busy posting photos. Bo had been watching all of it. Real time. From the cabin where I was now sitting, he had access to her email, her cloud storage, her location services. The FBI had access to her financial records. They were waiting. They wanted her to make one more move. They wanted her to try to collect on the policies. The moment that money hit her account, she was done. I sat in that cabin, and I listened to my son tell me all of this, and I did not know what to feel. I felt joy that he was alive. I felt rage that I had been allowed to grieve him for 10 days. I felt admiration that he had outsmarted a woman who had killed 2 men. I felt a dull, cold thing in my chest at the thought that I had walked her down the aisle of a vineyard in Sonoma 2.5 years earlier in place of her father, who she had told us had passed away. The man, I would later learn, had not passed away. He simply did not speak to her and had refused to attend the wedding, and would later tell the FBI that his daughter had been wrong in the head since she was a little girl. I asked Bo the question every parent would ask. I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner, why he had let me believe he was dead. He looked at me across that kitchen table, and his eyes filled up, and he said, "Dad, if I had told you, you would have killed her. You would have driven over there that night, and you would have shot her in her sleep, and you would have spent the rest of your life in a state penitentiary. I couldn't lose you too. I needed you to be at that funeral. I needed her to believe you believed it. Because if she believed you believed it, she would believe everyone believed it, and she would do what she was always going to do, and we would have her on every single thing she's ever done, not just to me, but to those other 2 men too. Their families deserve that, Dad. And so do I. I've been a man my entire life. I've been a hard man by choice, because the work I did required it. I have not cried in front of another person, including my wife, since my own father died in 1997. I cried at that table. I put my face in my hands and I wept like a child. And my boy got out of his chair and came around and put his arms around me and let me do it. Then he made me coffee. Then he told me what he needed me to do. What he needed me to do was go home. Continue to grieve. Continue to be the broken father at the broken funeral. Camilla was supposed to fly back from Punta Cana in 9 days. The insurance company, with the FBI's coordination, was going to release the first payout to her account in 7 days. She was going to come back to a quiet house and a quiet life and a sympathetic father-in-law. And within 24 hours, federal agents were going to come through her door with a warrant and 26 charges, including 2 counts of murder. I did exactly what he asked. I went home. I cooked the casserole my neighbor had made. I called the pastor and thanked him for the service. I sat on my back porch, and I watched the sun go down over the Blue Ridge, and I thought about my dead son, who was not dead. And I thought about my daughter-in-law who had killed 2 men before mine, and I drank 1 beer, slowly, and I did not call anyone. Camilla called me on the 4th day. She was crying. She was sorry. She had been in a bad place, she said. She had needed to get away to process her grief. Her friends, she said, had finally convinced her to come back. She would be home Friday. Could I come over? Could we talk? Could we please try to be a family again, since Bo was gone, and we were all each other had? I said yes. I told her my heart was broken. I told her I knew Bo would have wanted us to lean on each other. I told her I loved her. I am not proud of the lime, but I did it well. I had learned, over 38 years, how to make a guilty person feel safe. She landed in Charlotte on Friday night. She drove to Black Mountain. She slept in the bed she had shared with my son. The next morning, at 6:14 a.m., according to the report I would later read, 16 federal agents executed a search warrant at the residence. They found in a locked drawer in her vanity a small unmarked bottle of ethylene glycol with her fingerprints on it. They found, on her phone, 11 months of text messages with Jor-El discussing, in detail, the plan to dose Bo slowly until he died of natural causes, collect the insurance, and start over together in Costa Rica. They found, on her laptop, drafts of similar plans dating back to 2012 involving 4 different men, 2 of whom were dead. They arrested her in her bathrobe in the kitchen. She did not cry when they put the cuffs on her. She asked calmly if she was being charged with something. The agent in charge, a woman named McKendrick, listed the charges. Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, then said, "I would like to call my attorney." That was all she said. They walked her out into the front yard where the gardener Jor-El, who had also flown back from Punta Cana, was already in the back of a separate vehicle in his own set of cuffs. The media got hold of it within 48 hours. The local Asheville News ran it for 2 weeks. The story went national when one of the Tampa relatives of her first husband saw Camilla's mugshot on a true crime aggregator site and called the FBI and said, "That woman was married to my brother before he died. We never thought it was right." The Sacramento family came forward the following day. By the 3rd week, there were lawsuits, exhumations, and a new toxicology panel on the body of her second husband, which would come back 6 weeks later, positive for ethylene glycol. Camilla pled guilty in February to avoid the death penalty in 2 states. She is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole at a federal facility in West Virginia. Jor-El took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against her and is doing 28 years. Bo is alive. He is not, however, the same. He's living in Idaho now, under a name I won't share, working at a small architecture practice in a town small enough that nobody recognized him from the news cycle. He grew the beard out for real. He goes by something close enough to his own name that he can still answer to it without flinching. The FBI helped him with all of it. The legal mechanisms exist for cases like this. He is not, technically, a person in witness protection. But the practical effect is the same. There are still elements of Camilla's network the federal government is unwinding. There are people who would like to know where my son is, and the Bureau has asked us, politely, not to make it easy for them. I see him 3 or 4 times a year. I drive out. He doesn't fly home. We meet in his town, or in Montana, or once, last fall, in the cabin again, where this whole thing started. We hike. We fish. We drink coffee on porches, and sometimes we don't talk for an hour at a time, and that's fine. He's getting better. He's seeing a therapist twice a week. He told me last summer that he's started dating a woman who knows a version of his story, but not all of it, and that he thinks she's the real thing, and that he wants to tell her everything before it gets serious. I told him to take his time. I told him that the woman who deserves him is the woman who can hear all of it and stay. I came back from that last visit, and I sat on my porch, and I thought about everything that has happened in the last 11 months. And I thought I would write some of it down, because there are pieces of it I have never said out loud, and I have learned, since my wife died, that things you do not say out loud start to rot inside you. Here is what I want to say. I almost lost my son to a woman who was very good at being a wife. She remembered birthdays. She brought soup when his coworkers were sick. She charmed me at Thanksgiving. She wept on cue at his funeral the night before, on the phone into my ear, and made me feel sorry for her. 2 days later, she was on a beach. The thing that saved my son was not me. It was not my badge or my 38 years or my instincts. I missed it. I missed all of it. The thing that saved my son was that he listened, finally, to the small voice in his own chest that said, "This isn't right. This isn't love. Something is happening to me." He listened to that voice when most men, including his own father, would have told it to be quiet. If you are watching this, and there is a small voice in your own chest saying something is wrong, I would like to ask you, please, to listen to it. It does not matter how good the rest of your life looks. It does not matter how much you love the person, or how much they have told you they love you. The body knows. The body has known for a long time. And to whoever is in the comments right now, the one who is going to write that this is fake, or that AI made this up, or that this couldn't happen, I'd encourage you gently to look up the names Stacy Castor, Betty Newmar, Blanche Taylor Moore. There are women in this country who have done what my daughter-in-law did more than once and gotten away with it for decades. Some of them are still out there. The story you just heard is the story of one man who almost became a statistic, and one father who almost buried his only son for real, and one good doctor, and one good agent, and one tin-roofed cabin on a piece of land my grandfather cleared with his own 2 hands in 1948. I'm going to end this the way my boy ended things at the cabin that day, when I asked him if he had any regrets about how he'd done what he'd done. He thought about it for a long time. He looked out the window at the creek behind the house, the same creek he had caught his first trout in when he was 8 years old. He took a sip of his coffee. He said, "Dad, I regret that I married her. I regret that I didn't see her sooner. I regret that I made you stand at that grave. I will spend the rest of my life regretting what I made you feel that morning. But I do not regret being alive, and I do not regret making sure she will never do this to anybody else." I told him that was a good answer. I told him his mother would have been proud of him. I told him I was proud of him. And then we sat on the porch, and we watched the light come down through the pines, and for the first time since the hospital had called me on a Tuesday morning in the spring, I felt like I had my son back, which, in the end, is the only thing a father ever really wants. I've thought about the story almost every single morning since the day my boy walked out of that cabin and into my arms. I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, and I watch the light come up over the ridge, and I turn the whole thing over in my hands like a stone I can't quite stop polishing. Here is what I have come to believe. Nothing in a person's life happens by accident. Camilla did not wake up one morning a murderer. She became one slowly, choice by choice, lie by lie, year by year, until the woman who walked down the aisle of that vineyard was the inevitable end of every small dishonesty she had ever decided to tell. 2 husbands before mine had already paid for the road she was on. The third one, my beau, very nearly did. Cause and effect is not a moral lesson. It is the way the world actually works. You cannot poison a man's coffee for 10 months and expect, somewhere in the universe, that the bill will not come due. But the same law cuts the other way, and that's the part I want to leave you with. My son lived because he listened. He had no proof, no witness, no smoking gun. He had a feeling in his chest and the discipline to take it seriously. That feeling did not save him by itself. What saved him was that he turned that feeling into action. Careful action, patient action, the kind of action that takes months instead of minutes. He went to a doctor. He kept a record. He asked for help from people who had earned his trust over a lifetime. He did not act out of rage. He acted out of clarity. That is the difference between a man who survives and a man who becomes a headline. If there is anything I want a younger person to take from what happened to my family, it is this. Build your character before you need it. Build your friendships before you need them. Build your judgment before you need it. Because the day will come, and I promise you it will come, when something in your life is very wrong, and the only resources you will have to draw on are the ones you put in the bank long before the trouble started. Beau had Dr. Talk. Pelletier, because Beau had been a kind boy he remembered to ask after the doctor's wife at every appointment for 26 years. Beau had Thurman at the funeral home because Beau had stayed in touch with college friends most men let drift away. Beau had me, his father, because we had spent 34 years building something neither of us was willing to throw away. Camilla had Jarrell. That was the entire foundation she had built her life on. A man who flipped on her the moment a federal agent offered him a deal. The arithmetic of a life is very simple in the end. The people you treat well over decades are the ones who will stand in the gap for you on the day everything falls apart. The people you use are the people who will use you back when their own skin is on the line. I am 67 years old. I have buried more people than I would like to count. I have learned, finally, that the only currency that matters is the kind you spend on other people without expecting it back. Spend it generously. Spend it long before you need a return. And listen, please, to the small voice in your own chest, because it almost always knows the truth before the rest of you is ready to hear it.